Good morning, everybody. My name's Andrew Thin. I know many of you, but not all of you. Some of you I know over Twitter and all the rest of it, but it's wonderful to see so many people here, and thank you very, very much for joining us. This is actually our third conference, the Land Commission's third conference on land reform, and I'm sorry that it has to be online. You know why, but on the upside, it has enabled people to join us who otherwise might have found it very difficult, and I'm pleased about that. I think it is hugely important that we reach all of the people of Scotland, because land reform matters and will impact upon all of the people in Scotland. It's a hugely important subject for the future of our country, and the opportunities that land reform offer our people are diverse and highly significant. And we've wrapped them around three themes for this conference: climate, the economy, and communities. But the land reform will reach into everybody's lives. And you just need to look across the North Sea to see what happens in other parts of Northern Europe where land reform is further progressed than here, to see what it can do for us. A conference like this is a big organizational challenge for a wee organization. We only have about a dozen staff. And we've managed to get together something like 1,400 people attending over 3 days and 12 sessions. So I'm really pleased with that. So I do just want to say a massive thank you to the staff and others who have helped. Actually, it's not just our core staff, but others have helped too. They've worked tirelessly. They've been working right through this weekend, endless emails going backwards and forwards, getting everything together. And this is a team of people. I think you can be proud. These are public servants. They're here to serve you, and you can be proud of them. People say to me again and again, it's extraordinary how much the Land Commission is achieving, how much we are moving this subject forward. So a massive thank you from me to all those people. You all know who you are. A few wee bits of housekeeping before we start this session. If things go wrong, I hope they won't go wrong, but if things go wrong, we've got helpers in the background, so don't panic, and I'll try not to panic either. We should be able to sort things. We are recording this, and it'll be then available on our YouTube channel, so please just be aware of that. The chat button at the bottom of your screen, if you click on that, you can have a chat with others as we go along. And I see that already a number of people are using that who are obviously experienced at this sort of thing, but please use it. It's a great way to sort of interact and engage with other folk. There's also a Q&A button just to the left of the chat button, I think. And we'll use that for you to, if you wish to ask a question in the panel discussions, please use that, and I'll try and manage that discussion as best I can. With the best part of 200 people on this, there may be more questions than we can cope with, so I'll do my best to pull things together. And lastly, in the housekeeping slot, there'll be a short survey afterwards at the end of this conference, and we'll email that to you. But please give us our feedback, your feedback. We're constantly striving to do better, but we also, as public servants, we are accountable to you, and we want to be held accountable. So tell us what you think, negative and positive, and use the survey. Now, the real business of this morning, our keynote speaker is Scotland's Minister for Environment, Biodiversity and Land Reform, Màiri McAllan. And Màiri, a huge welcome from us and from everybody here. Actually, it's really very, very good of you to spare the time and to come and talk about what is such a big issue for our country and for the people of Scotland. We're going to hear from Màiri about the Scottish Government's ongoing, it's not a new thing, it's the Scottish Government's ongoing work on land reform. It's been working pretty hard on it since '99, and well, a few of you are old enough, as I am, to remember Donald Dew's '98 McEwen lecture when he said, talked about the symbolism of land reform being one of the first acts of the Scottish Parliament. So the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government have been driving land reform for some time now. But of course, we've got some way to go. We know that. That's what the Land Commission is here for. And after we hear from Màiri for about 20 minutes or so, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions and discussion, and we will end by 10:30. Màiri is a lawyer by training and a former advisor to the First Minister, and she grew up in Biggar, which many of you will know, and represents the constituency of Clydesdale, which is in South Lanarkshire, which in many ways, I mean, South Lanarkshire is a microcosm of many of the opportunities that land reform offers to us and the Scottish people. Just before the pandemic, we held one of our monthly public meetings in Biggar, and those public meetings are very important and now have. I actually found that public meeting fascinating for the frustrations, the opportunities, the insights that people expressed at it. It's a really interesting bit of the country to have grown up in. Màiri studied law at Glasgow University, a great Scottish university, and also at the University of Ghent in Belgium. And that's important because Scotland is not some sort of island. You know, we can learn from other parts of Europe. And my daughter, who's a human rights lawyer currently working in Maastricht University, was very anxious that I also mention that Màiri was a co-founder of the human rights organisation Reb Law Scotland. And they're a great organisation, actually, which I particularly, because I work in the prisons as well, an organisation dedicated to ensuring that the law genuinely serves all of Scotland people. Very, very important initiative. So it's hard, I think it's hard to imagine anyone better qualified, frankly, to understand the opportunities that land reform offers our country. So Minister, a very, very warm welcome. Thank you so much for coming. I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you for that very kind introduction. It's quite interesting to think back and remember the days in Glasgow and think about Reb Law Scotland and all that we sought to achieve there as well. So that was very kind of you. Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be invited to open the 2021 Scottish Land Commission Conference, and the third since the Commission was established in 2017. So my thanks again go to Andrew and to all of the Land Commissioners for inviting me. As Andrew said, I am joining you today as the newly elected MSP for Clydesdale and newly appointed Minister for Environment and Land Reform. And I think you can imagine that the last few months have been a bit of a whirlwind. I feel sometimes that my feet haven't quite touched the ground yet, and there's a huge amount to learn, and I acknowledge that, and I look forward to continuing to learn. But yes, as Andrew pointed out, some of the experience that I have, I hope will serve me well. Being an advisor to the First Minister, having been a lawyer who qualified in property law, but who, as Andrew mentioned, equally was very interested in forming a human rights organisation, and also having worked very closely with the formidable land reform campaigner and just formidable woman generally, Rosanna Cunningham. I think that the combination of those things should hopefully stand me in good stead to be a helpful part of Scotland's land reform journey. So, as Andrew alluded to, we have been pursuing land reform in Scotland since the early days of devolution, and a great deal of progress has been made, and we will discuss more of that later. But the question of who owns, controls, and benefits from our land, waters, assets, it remains a pervasive issue in our national psyche. Historically, inequitable patterns of ownership, they persist despite much effort and real concrete progress. And this continues to impact on our economic, social and environmental goals and objectives as a nation, but equally as individuals. We know that property rights are some of the most fundamental in our legal system. For centuries, they have been the cornerstone of rights and, thanks to a lot of the work of the Commission, increasingly responsibilities. And we also know that great progressive reforms have been required in Scots property law in order to make it more equitable and fair. Scotland's relationship with land and land reform is often described as a journey. I think Andrew and I have both already referred to it as such this morning, and that journey must now continue. That is why we in the SNP Scottish Government, alongside our colleagues in the Scottish Green Party, have an ongoing and unwavering commitment to land reform. We continue to strongly support community ownership for all aspiring communities who now have more options than ever to acquire land and assets. These include several distinct rights to buy so that communities can choose the right route to community ownership, which best suits their situation and indeed their aspirations. Of course, we can only continue to achieve successful land reform outcomes by working in partnership with stakeholders and with communities. And that's why I'm so delighted to be speaking at an event attended by such a wide variety of stakeholders, and why I'm particularly delighted to cast my eye down to the chat bar and see so many of you saying hello from different corners of Scotland, and indeed I think from the north of England as well, which is fantastic. I would like to take this wonderful opportunity that you've given me today to set out my vision for land reform over the course of the next parliamentary session. But before I do so, I would like to take a moment to consider the quite unique context in which we are currently living and the challenges and opportunities that that presents. Firstly, the fact that we aren't together today is testament to the enduring impact that COVID-19 is having on us all. The pandemic has truly upended the last 19 months of our lives. COVID has taken something from us all, and so much from some. So my thoughts are again with all those who are mourning the loss of a loved one, and indeed those whose businesses are struggling despite best efforts. But amid the confusion and the anxiety of the pandemic, there was hope, in that those who could spent more time in the natural world, taking solace in green spaces, noticing the majesty and the fragility of nature, and equally that communities came together, often using community assets to provide support and local resilience. And indeed, I was very interested, my officials told me the other day that statistics for 2020 show that, despite the pandemic, the number of assets in community ownership continued to increase, this time by 2.5%, from 597 to 612 since 2019. And this covers a total area of nearly 200,000 hectares, which is about 2.5% of the total land of Scotland. But if I can just return to context for a moment. So during the second wave of this virus and a long winter lockdown, EU exit, the ramifications of which continue to be very acutely felt, it finally occurred. And on top of all that, while COVID and EU exit dominated our lives, the climate and nature crises continued unabated, with lives lost through fire, flooding, and drought throughout the world. Anyone would be forgiven in those circumstances for feeling just a little bit overwhelmed. But I think that it's incumbent upon all of us to find hope and to see opportunities. The reason I mention this is because the two principal challenges of the coming decades, perhaps the coming generation, are recovery from the pandemic, economic, fair recovery, and on the other hand, tackling the twin crises of climate change and environmental loss. And land reform has a key role to play in responding to both of these. Scotland's legal climate targets, underpinned, of course, by a legal commitment to a just transition, are still regarded as one of the most, if not the most ambitious in the world. And that's because of our commitment to be net zero by 2045, but that interim target of being 75% reduced by 2030 is what makes it quite so ambitious. Alongside this, we're also committed to tackling the twin crises of biodiversity loss, something which my new colleague Lorna Slater will be leading on in government. And one reason that Scotland can afford to be so ambitious in these twin emergencies is, quite frankly, because of the ample potential within our natural environment to sequester greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and to support the growth of biodiversity. That means that in the coming years, there will be significant challenges on how best to optimise the enormous value of Scotland's land towards net zero, but always in a way that is fair and leaves no one behind. I firmly believe, as Environment Minister, that we need to put people and their well-being at the very heart of our environmental ambitions. That, to me, means seizing opportunities and mitigating risks as they arrive. And opportunities and risk will be inherent in this increasing natural capital value that we're witnessing just now. My vision is of, which is, and I hope it's one that many of you today will share, is of a Scotland where thriving urban and growing rural and island communities can live and work sustainably on land and waters, which are owned more fairly and diversely. And as recognised by the Just Transition Commission, land reform has an important part to play in supporting all of this. And I think that the themes of your conference over the next few days with climate change, economy and communities speaks to just how entrenched land will be in our journey to net zero. So investment in Scotland's natural capital and its impact on the land market is emerging as a complex issue. I believe that there is an immediate window of opportunity for taking action to ensure that increasing levels of natural capital investment deliver benefits for our local communities and indeed wider society. So I'm therefore delighted that the Scottish Land Commission is taking forward a package of work in this area as a matter of priority, and I very much look forward to continuing to work with them on that. We must find a pathway to balance the need for private investment, because frankly the public sector cannot do this alone, but balance that with community rights and ambitions. Now, I am very keen to focus on the future, the exciting future, but it is worth reminding ourselves of the progress that we have made thus far in Scotland. As we all know, the Land Reform Act in 2003 was groundbreaking in introducing community right to buy, and that being the first such mechanism of its kind. We made much progress in the 2015 Act, and in March 2016, the Scottish Parliament passed its second Scottish Land Reform Act, and we spent the majority of the last 5 years implementing its provisions. And indeed, as I mentioned before, I had the pleasure of working in the First Minister's office closely with Rosanna Cunningham in that regard. So it's worth just highlighting some of the key parts of that Act and why they've been so important. It would be amiss of me not to begin then by pointing out that the Scottish Land Commission was established on the 1st of April 2017 and will be celebrating its 5th birthday next spring. My predecessor and I have hugely welcomed the Commission's varied and challenging programme of work. It has established itself as an authoritative voice in land reform, providing Scottish Government with advice and recommendations across a wide range of complex policy areas. This work has led to our commitment to tackle concentration of land ownership in the upcoming bill, and to our increased investment in tackling vacant and derelict land, which I think my colleague, the Minister for Community Wealth Building, Tom Arthur, will be addressing the conference on later in the week. I think one of the most important things that the Commission has established is the Good Practice Programme. Non-legislative good practice is key to encouraging the cultural change amongst those who make decisions about land. And I believe that the protocol could help very much so in those natural capital, vexed questions of natural capital that I mentioned earlier. Now, as well as the Commission, in September 2017, the Scottish Government published the world's first land rights and responsibilities statement. This statement sets out a vision of strong and dynamic relationships between Scotland's land and its people, where all land contributes to a modern and successful country, and where land rights and responsibilities are both balanced and fulfilled. We should take great pride in this being the first of its kind anywhere in the world. It demonstrates very publicly our commitment to land reform, to our people, to their ability to fulfill their social and economic potential now and into the future. Now, many of you will be deeply familiar with the work the Commission does to support that statement, such as the production of advisory notes and case studies to help ensure that public benefit from land is fully realised. The Commission have also developed a series of practical protocols and supporting documents, including case studies and route maps, which support understanding of the principles crucially in real life scenarios. In recognition that circumstances change, the 2016 Act requires Scottish ministers to review the statement by next September, and we intend to launch a public consultation on the statement by the end of this year. A great deal has changed since 2017 and will continue to change, and the statement needs to be relevant to the challenges we face today and in the future. So I would encourage you all, if you're able, to keep an eye out for the consultation and to respond, because your input really does help us. In April 2018, we published our guidance on engaging communities in decisions relating to land, aimed at all those with controlling interests. And this is important because that includes private and public landowners, NGOs, charities, and community owners. It doesn't discriminate. Its primary aim is to help ensure people have the opportunity to be involved in decisions about land that affect them. It seems simple, but it's a great feat to have achieved it. Earlier this year, my predecessor oversaw a review which found that the guidance to be a very effective tool for encouraging engagement. However, it also found that there was scope to raise awareness of the guidance, and I would very much welcome your support in doing that, in raising the profile. And of course, there is more to come from the 2016 Act. On the 1st of April 2022, the Register of Controlling Interests in Land will become operational. This will increase transparency about who's making decisions about land, including those from outside the UK. And when I think back to my days as a property lawyer and undertaking the due diligence which is involved in land and the transfers thereof, this to me is an absolutely seismic piece of work which will make a really substantial difference. And it puts Scotland at the forefront of Europe in delivering the greatest transparency, I think, than any other part of the UK. And of course, alongside all of this, the Scottish Land Fund has been helping communities to acquire assets. Since 2012, the Scottish Government Scottish Land Fund has awarded a total of almost £40 million to 240 community groups. In just the last year alone, over 9 million was awarded to over 60 groups, and nearly 300,000 people live in communities that received those land awards. In addition, the receipt of a Land Fund award has enabled communities to go on and raise and to leverage in funds that we reckon totals around £5 million from other sources. Across the whole of Scotland, from Shetland to Selkirk, from Arran to Aberdeen, communities are being given the opportunity to grow and thrive through assets that they now own. And just an example that's in my part of the world, fairly close to my part of the world, although the south of Scotland is a wide geographical area. The Langham Initiative negotiated the sale of 5,200 acres of land from the Clwyd Estates. They now have plans to restore and manage the New Taras Valley Nature Reserve, including with renewables, conservation and tourism. This is a fantastic example of where the underlying legislation is driving a cultural change through which negotiated sales are becoming more and more prevalent. And I personally had some experience of that cultural change when I was working in the legal property area, as I mentioned. So that is some of what we've achieved, and you can tell why I'm proud of it. But the question for today and for the coming days really is, what next? I am clear that we face urgent challenges, that we must tackle them fairly, and that in doing so, we can create real opportunities, and that land reform in all of its guises has a key role to play. As you might be aware, the Butte House Agreement, or otherwise known as the Cooperation Agreement between the Scottish Government and our colleagues in the Scottish Green Party, as well as our recently published programme for government, they commit us to a further land reform bill in this parliamentary session, which I aim to introduce by the end of 2023. The bill will seek to tackle problematic scale and concentration, and will aim to ensure that the public interest is considered on transfers of particularly large scale land holdings. We will aim to introduce a preemption in favour of community buyout, where public interest tests apply and where it's appropriate to do so. Our proposals will build on and will complement some of the existing right to buy mechanisms. And as I mentioned earlier, the Commission have undertaken a programme of work on scaling concentration and published a discussion paper in February this year with a number of recommendations on how to tackle the issue, including the introduction of a public interest test. It sets out details of how the test might operate and some of the issues to be addressed. It's very upfront about the issues that need to be addressed. I actually took the opportunity just to reread the report yesterday, and I was once again very excited by the prospect of what it was recommending. My officials are working through the recommendations to develop an ambitious suite of proposals, which we will then take for consultation. I'm very conscious of two things. Firstly, that land reform is sometimes wrongly characterised as a rural issue, when in fact it's about empowering communities across the whole of Scotland. And equally, that land reform can be seen as a controversial issue. Well, I am determined that we will bring forward a bill that is very ambitious, but that will, of course, be fully compliant with human rights legislation and indeed the devolution settlement. Specifically, we know that we will require robust evidence of the wider public interest to justify interference with Article 1, Protocol 1, and the right to private property. And I'm very seized of the interaction between the rights of the individual and indeed the wider public interest in making progress in Scotland's land ownership patterns. I want to be very clear that property rights do not prevent land reform measures when they are justified. The previous land reform acts were fully compliant, and the next one will be too. And I know that there are differing views on what the bill should include, but I can absolutely assure you that I am committed to working with all stakeholders. I feel very passionately as an individual that you ought not to progress policy which affects people without having first discussed and understood it with all those who are likely to be affected. So to everyone watching who has an interest in this, I can guarantee that I will be open and willing to discuss these matters with you. And I encourage everyone to take a wide and a very close involvement in the consultation progress. So folks, to conclude, land is a fundamental to many of our ambitions for a better Scotland. The coming years present enormous challenges. We are living in extraordinary times, but equally they present opportunity. This government's ambition for Scotland traverse a range of social, environmental and economic objectives, but I would pull out two key statutory objectives. Firstly, to end our contribution to climate change within a generation. And secondly, to consign child poverty to history. Sometimes I think about our government's ambitions as hanging off both of these statutory requirements that we've legislated for. I strongly believe that the way in which land is used, owned, and managed is fundamental to achieving both of these key aspirations, and that we really must be ambitious in our efforts. By supporting more communities to own land, by acting to ensure that natural capital markets can deliver benefits for communities, and by taking steps to address concentration of land ownership where it's problematic, we can help support a greener, fairer Scotland and deliver a just transition to net zero. I'm really excited and honoured, in fact, to be playing a role at this really crucial time, and I very much look forward to working in partnership with the Commission and with all of you over the parliamentary session. And I hope that I'll get to meet those of you who haven't already had the opportunity to meet in person very shortly. But that, Andrew, that brings to an end what I had hoped to say. I think we've got some time for discussion now. So I'm really keen to understand what folks are hoping to see in the bill and indeed other non-legislative areas of progress over the next 5 years. So thank you very much.
So thank you very much indeed. Just to echo what you just said, I think all the land commissioners actually feel really honoured to be part of this. This is history in the making, and this is history that will, if we get this right, will benefit every citizen of Scotland, and that that is absolutely fundamental to the way in which we have thought about this and will continue to think about this. It would be so easy to go after easy wins that benefit a few middle-class people or whatever. That's not what we're in the business of doing. Really pleased to see on the chat people saying that the online thing's actually a good way of doing things. I'm very encouraged by that, because you know, it worries me, because I'm acutely conscious that public meetings and conferences, it's what people say to you privately in the margins that often really matter. And of course, it's difficult to do that here. So good to see that people nonetheless value this format, and people from Orkney or wherever obviously makes it much better for them. So that's great. Please, nonetheless, if you wish to have a word with me or anybody else afterwards, there will be an email address on our website. There is, and email in, and I'm more than happy to phone folks, so we can still do the margin stuff here. Now, there's a question and answer button, and I'd ask you to use the question and answer button if you've got questions, and there's a number of questions coming in there, so that's super. There's a chat button, and people are already using that, including for questions. It would make my life slightly easier if you would try and use the Q&A button for your questions, but I'll try and do both. What I'm going to try and do now is sort of group and bracket questions, because there's a whole heap of questions. There's no way we're going to get through all of these one by one in the time available. So let's just kick off when the first person to put something in was Roger Crofts, used to be Chief Executive of Scottish Natural Heritage, now Nature Scot. Roger, thank you for that. So what Roger's really asking is about the whole business of local land use strategies and local land use decision making. And the government's thoughts, you know, the Land Commission did some work for government and for Parliament on land use partnerships. But I think what Roger is looking for, and I know others are, is how do you see that going forward, Minister? This whole business of how do we ensure that land use, on the one hand, is land use decision making is participative, that people can take part in it, but on the other hand, that it's sufficiently localized to reflect local priorities. It's not an easy balancing act, but a valuable question, Roger. Thank you.
Thoughts? Yeah, thank you, Andrew, and thanks, Roger, for the question. And it's one of the issues which, as a new minister, I'm grappling with. In fact, recently I was doing a press interview, and the journalist said to me, "So what's keeping you up at night?" I thought, I'm not going to tell you, but it's these kind of questions actually. So we did take the advice from the Commission on regional land use partnerships, and we are piloting them just now. And I think that's a really, really fertile model in order to test some of these points that we're bringing out here about participation and ensuring that it's truly democratic. I mean, two things that I am particularly keen to ensure from the regional land use partnerships, which are currently being piloted, is firstly that they truly are local, that the people who are taking the decisions and who are participating in them are representative of the areas that they are purporting to represent. And secondly, that they're truly democratic, and that the decisions that are being reached are as a result of a democratic process. So we are in the early days of the regional land use partnerships, but from a ministerial perspective, I'm very enthusiastic about what they could achieve, but watching very closely against these the democratic and the local aspects to make sure that they're able to fulfill those, because I think that they're absolutely essential to the decision-making process.
Yes, thank you. The second sort of group of questions, if I can put it that way, are from Ian Kirkwood and one or two others. And it's the whole business of taxation and land value and income from land. Now, this is a little bit unfair, Minister, because we haven't given you our advice yet on this. And we are working really hard on providing you with, and Parliament, with advice on taxation and the link between taxation and land reform. And of course, some of this is reserved to Westminster, so it's made even more complicated. But I think rather than attempt to, there's a whole series of questions from Ian Kirkwood, rather than attempt to answer them all, which we simply can't do, thoughts on the tax system and where we might go with that, recognizing that we haven't actually given you any advice, so forgive me.
Well, Andrew, in that case, do you want to kick off with some of your thoughts, or even Hamish's thoughts, and then I can, because I do have some views, but I shouldn't like to preempt anything that's coming.
Okay, I don't want us to get hung up on this because there are plenty of people, other people here wanting to hear from you. So what I think I might do actually is just hold this, and we'll maybe bring Hamish in later on tax.
Okay.
Well, just give me 2 seconds. Hamish, are you able to hear me, and are you able to come in? Because if you are, I'll ask you to come in with a few quick thoughts on tax. Here's Hamish. Yeah, here we go. We'll get some quick thoughts from Hamish on this, and then we'll move on, because I think people want to hear from you, Minister, not us.
I'm happy to say briefly a bit of what we are doing. We are looking at the moment at really opportunities to improve the effectiveness of taxation in relation to land, and we'll be providing some advice to government and Parliament later this year, which is partly about short-term opportunities. So, Minister, picking up your point about economic recovery, what are some immediate opportunities within devolved powers in terms of taxation powers to boost recovery, particularly with a town centre and urban focus as well. But also that advice will start to look at the longer-term direction of kind of ways to improve the relationship between tax and land, and looking at where that relationship is weak at the moment and how we can strengthen and improve taxation of land. Recognising, of course, that land is a huge asset base for Scotland. About half of our nation's wealth is tied up in land. So the most fundamental question is how do we use that more productively, most productively. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what our advice will be focusing on, and I probably won't say any more about that just at this stage.
Thanks, Hamish. I think it's really interesting because, and you talk about this in the February paper. It's about all of these tools that we use to regulate, and you draw some really interesting comparisons with other parts of market, be it energy and food production, and the way that, governments use these tools, be it tax, be it regulation, to control what's happening, to control competition and to avoid monopoly. So I'll be very interested to get your advice on that. And I think that, yes, it's difficult because there is well, there are few devolved powers as far as I can see, but I think that we've done some quite progressive work with the tax powers that we have, including in land and buildings transaction tax. So yes, I'll look forward to receiving that. Thank you, Hamish.
Minister, thank you very much. I'm clearly going to struggle with so many questions coming in. I will do my best. Please forgive me, everybody, if I don't quite come to your specific point. But another theme you'll not be surprised, Minister, is about the large-scale concentrated land holdings, the possibility of a public interest test. We've provided advice, or at least early advice. There's an intention in the programme for government to have a bill by 2023 around some of this. So there's a number of questions really about the government's thoughts and intentions to deal with what I think people are, certainly what we identify very clearly as being about local power monopolies. Do you want to just offer some thoughts that I can't give you all the questions, there's so many here, but just general thoughts around that?
No, that's fine, Andrew, thank you. Yes, and I expected there'd be quite a lot of interest around this because it's going to be one of the headline policies, I think, that we've sought to introduce in the bill. I think the evidence that the Commission brought forward was pretty clear cut, that concentration can be very problematic to communities, constraining opportunity. It can create negative relationships. Of course, it doesn't always result in that. And I think we need to be quite clear that scaling concentration doesn't, in every circumstance, create that constraining of opportunity and the negative relationships. But where it does, we must have a mechanism to redress that, because it will be holding back the economic, social and environmental opportunities of the people who live in that area. And so the scaling concentration work was one of 3 recommendations from the Commission, and I'm very interested in the others as well, particularly the management plan, because I think that speaks very clearly to this idea that it's not always the need to buy that communities require, or that that we need to break up. It won't always suit communities to buy, but that doesn't mean that there aren't better uses and more progressive uses that the land could be put to. So we'll be working very hard on how to bring the scaling concentration policy to life, to overcome some of those evidence-based issues that we know pertain to the Human Rights Act, and of course that you can interfere with the right to property where it's legitimate, where it's proportionate. So we need to work hard on fleshing out that public interest point, but that will all be part of the consultation, which I look forward to undertaking.
So thank you. We're also doing some further work on human rights and this whole business of balancing property with other economic, social and community, cultural rights. So watch this space, those who asked questions around that. Another theme, unsurprisingly, is the whole question of land values and soaring land prices and the links between that, carbon reduction, carbon capture, climate and so on. And again, forgive me, this is an area where we still haven't given you advice. We're working on it pretty flat out. We've in fact prioritized this. We had intended to do it next year. We're now trying to work on it this year because it is moving so fast. So early thoughts on that, Minister, but recognizing that this is a very fast moving thing.
No, thank you, Andrew. Yes, I think we're both very conscious that this is very fast moving. I spoke in a debate from Rhoda Grant brought the motion last week, who of course is a long-standing land reform campaigner. I'm very concerned with it, and I'm awaiting your advice, yes, but I'm also working with colleagues in government on this just now, speaking, for example, with the Minister for Just Transition, who, that is a new ministerial post, which I think demonstrates the government's commitment to making sure that this is fair. It boils down to me for the fact that I tried to bring out in the opening address there, which is that Scotland is moving rapidly ahead with our climate change and nature ambitions, and one of the key reasons we can actually afford to do so. When people speak to me from Europe and they're saying, how is Scotland doing this? How did you manage to extrapolate that you could have these targets? Well, we say, well, we've got enormous capacity for nature-based solutions in our natural environment, but we have to be very careful with that, because it is the people who've been living and working on these areas of peatland or these areas that could be planted with trees, which we need to make sure that they benefit from it. I'm interested, and I know that Andrew, you will hopefully come to me with some recommendations on how we do this, but I'm sort of very mindful of the model that we have with onshore renewables, onshore wind and community benefits. I think that the opportunity for community ownership of some of these projects will be ways to make sure that we don't have something which I know some commentators have said could be tantamount to a second clearances. I am very, very clear that Net Zero Scotland must have people living and working on the land. And sometimes, we have to be careful about, yes, talking about rewilding, that's fine, but I want to hear people talking about repeopling as well, because when I hear the phrase rewilding, I think, where are the people in that? So that's where I am, and I look forward again to some further discussions on that.
So thank you. That helpfully just picks up another question, which I was going to pass back, but I think I won't, which is, it is clear that the farming community in particular are slightly nervous that we forget about the fact that land primarily for an awful lot of us is about producing food. And so I think that reassurance you've just given is a really helpful one in addressing that point.
Yeah, I would just add to that, Andrew, that my colleague Màiri McAllan, who is Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs and who I also work to, is working just now, and any farmers, food producers on the call will be aware of this, on post-EU exit agricultural policy. And we're very clear that there's three things: climate change, biodiversity support, and crucially food production, because the last thing that we want is to live in a climate impacted world without the capacity that we have just now to produce food. So it's again, that's another period of change that the industry is going through. But if I know anything about Scotland's farmers, it's that they care very much about their land and that they want to survive. So I know that I can already see that they're being very adaptable to the changes.
Thank you. And you can't be brought up in Biggar without knowing a lot about Scottish farming. So that comes from the heart. Thank you. Let's just move this a little bit into the urban environment. A lot of people on the call are, I think, in rural locations, but there are some urban, and vacant and derelict land, which was not particularly on the radar when we started off the Land Commission, but actually impacts on hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of lives in Scotland, because it is a blight on communities, particularly in west central Scotland, but actually all over Scotland. We forget that there are vacant and derelict lands. We did a public meeting in Orkney last week, vacant and derelict land in Orkney. So this is not just an urban issue, but it is often seen as one. And great progress made and significant funds being allocated. There's a number of questions, so just your thoughts about how we're doing, where that might go.
Yeah, well, I think Andrew, you've spelled that out really well there. It's one of the most, it has the most opportunities, one of the most opportunities, I think, within an urban context to make a real difference. And one of the things that's in my portfolio is forestry. And I think it's very interesting how, you know, again, like some of the other topics we're talking about here, forestry is often regarded as something that happens in rural Scotland, and that you can't get the carbon sequestration qualities, etc., unless you have great swathes of forested area. But we are pursuing policies of urban forests, of wee forests, and actually last week I joined primary school children in Glasgow to help them kickstart one of the biggest forested areas of urban Scotland that has been seen for generations. So I think it's about improving green space in city centres, the opportunity of what to do with these otherwise wasted bits of land is enormous, be it housing, renewable projects, green space, community gardens. And I've seen some fantastic examples of it already in this role, and I feel very fortunate to have done so. And of course, that the £50 million fund, our vacant and derelict land fund, will now become available. And again, my colleague Tom Arthur will be overseeing that in his portfolio. I think it could be transformational.
Thank you. This is both rural and urban, but you mentioned in your talk the land rights and responsibilities statement and the review of that, which I think was just an enormously powerful and important step forward in 2016-17. But the point is made quite often that while land rights are often legal rights, if you like, at the moment the responsibilities are essentially non-binding. And I have to say, most landowners in Scotland are taking their responsibilities more seriously as a result of what the Scottish Government has done. But it is the case that the odd one does cock a snoot, to use a well-known phrase. And I don't want you. This is again. A lot of these questions are difficult because they're preempting things that are coming, and there's a consultation coming on the land rights statement, but. Maybe some thoughts on that or on the consultation and what you're looking for.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. No, I agree that the statement is, well, it is the first of its kind, and it's a position that's been reached, which we should be very proud of, and that we should protect and seek to grow, actually. And I think we saw it being challenged a little bit during some of the anxiety that I talked about during the pandemic. Where we had this coincidence of suddenly people spending more time in the natural environment, but people being awful concerned about the virus, quite rightfully. And it was challenged, and it continues to be challenged. But I think that it sets an important statement about that balancing of rights and responsibilities, which we have to maintain. And like everything, things take time to embed. But I think we've seen in other aspects of some of the work that we've done, including with the tenant farming work, that things being non-binding or questions about what penalties are attached to things, sometimes that matters, but sometimes just the embedding of the expectation of rights and responsibilities starts to have the impact that we hope it can have. I hope that's clear. I felt it's that idea that yes, we should look to see what needs to be done where it's breached, but just the very existence of it has had a substantial effect in people's understandings of rights and responsibilities. But I think we have got some way to go, because I know that in other jurisdictions, in other countries, this expectation is far more embedded than ours. So yes, I think I'll be looking to see how that can be played out in the consultation.
Thank you. So that's a call from the Minister to you, or the participants, to please respond to that consultation. I think that is important. The Land Commission has attempted to set out what responsibilities look like through its sort of good practice, best practice program, and we've put a lot of things in place. And of course, the Tenant Farming Commissioner, who has a slightly more statutory role in this through his codes, or her codes if it's a female commissioner, also has a mechanism now for setting out what responsible behaviour looks like. But we'll look forward, and I think everyone will look forward to seeing how people respond to this consultation. Minister, I'm going to move this on to another hot topic, sorry, but that's the nature of these things, which is housing, and land for housing rather than housing itself. And we have done, it's a very, very difficult issue, and Scotland, like frankly the rest of Europe and certainly the rest of the UK, has a real housing problem caused by demographics, economics and all the rest of it, and social norms. It's not just a rural issue by any means, it's a big urban issue too. The whole business of making land available is really important. There are no magic bullets here, and I'm certainly not asking you to offer one, that would be naive, but just any thoughts on this that might be helpful for people?
Yeah, of course. I actually had a meeting with some SNP members in Wester Ross the other night, and it was supposed to be a wide-ranging discussion, and basically we focused on the availability of land for housing and how difficult it was, and how they saw parts of their homes being 50-60% houses which are holiday lets and indeed second homes. And it's exceptionally problematic. And I know that as a young person living in rural Scotland, that there are significant challenges. You want to stay where it is that you grew up and you want to contribute to your communities, but there's either no available housing, services are stretched, or indeed if you can't find a job in your local area and you have to travel, you're the one that's always late and apologizing. And at the end of the day, you think, will I give up? Will I just leave? And will I go and find opportunities and housing elsewhere? And that's something that we need to tackle. And we have some the government has some quite ambitious targets for the creation of housing, a percentage of which will be affordable and a percentage of which will be in island and rural communities. So the Housing Minister will be taking that forward. I know, Andrew, that the Commission had advised about the availability of public land and how to make that available. It's something that I'm looking into. We do already have existing systems in place to consider public land and its suitability for housing. But as I say, yes, it's something that I'm mindful of from my own experiences and discussing with officials internally.
Thanks, Minister. Big issue for everybody, and I don't think anyone expects you to suddenly produce a rabbit out of a hat on that one. But what is indeed, but what is important is that the government has absolutely got that in its sights now, and we've done a lot of work as the Land Commission on that, and I think that's important in that. It's easy to sit and wring your hands over these issues. We need to find answers and try things. So that's great. And
it's very difficult because you've got to balance, and this was the point that some of the Wester Ross folks were explaining to me, that yes, these are problematic, the second homes, the holiday lets, but also the Highland and Island region is, it's underpinned to an extent by tourism. So we need to find that balance. But yes, I'm just reminding myself there that there was two parts of our Housing to 2040 strategy, which I think were particularly interesting. And they were giving the ability to local authorities to firstly tackle second home ownership where it's a problem in that area, and secondly to bring disused buildings back into use where they are problematic. So those are just two small examples, and land reform generally feeds into this in a big way, because whether it's the vacant and derelict land in our city that we were talking about, or whether it's tackling scaling concentration in rural areas, frankly, at the bottom of that is just addressing the needs of societies as they arise. And if we can free up the space to do that, then I think that, be it housing, be it renewables, be it a shop, it's about what that community needs and wants, and facilitating that.
Thank you. Great. Just, I've only got a few minutes left. And there's a question from David Cameron. I assume that's David and Harris. David, the question is about the future of crofting. I think I'm going to leave that. Forgive me. It is an important issue, but it's probably one for the Crofting Commission. So I'm going to leave that. Very aware of it, though, David. The last question, or sort of subject, if you like, for the last couple of minutes. People often ask me, and there's a number of questions on this theme, about public owners of land. There are some big public owners of land in Scotland. Forest and Land Scotland is only one, probably the best known. But local authorities are big owners of land, for example. And also there are some big NGO owners of land. And people often ask me, does land reform apply to these people? So I'm paraphrasing a number of questions here, but by just sort of asking as a final question, just your thoughts on the role of public land and big NGOs in the whole process of moving Scotland forward.
Does land reform apply to these groups? Absolutely. Yes, it does. This is not only about private owners. This is about public owners. It's about NGOs who are some of the biggest landowners in Scotland. So no, I'm very clear-minded about the fact that everything we've talked about, rights, responsibilities, progress, fulfilling, economic and social needs of the people who live in the area, these responsibilities apply to landowners in whatever guise. I think that's well understood, though, amongst the landowners. I think that, for example, NGOs are very seized of that point. But for my part, I certainly see this as being across the board.
Minister, thank you very much indeed. And I could just echo what you've just said by pointing out that many NGOs and many public owners of land have worked really closely with us on the Good Practice Programme, and that's been enormously helpful. And we'll continue to work. The potential for some of these bigger public and third sector owners to provide leadership is immense. So thanks to those who are already working with us, and please to the rest, please work with us. Minister, thank you. We're a minute from being out of time, so I'm going to bring this to a close. I think that's been really valuable. It's very wide-ranging, but the sense of ambition, the sense of momentum is enormously encouraging. I think people will be encouraged to hear that energy from you. So thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. I'm most grateful. The next session, which is at 11:30, is on natural capital and the just transition, a very topical subject, one that has been covered significantly and extensively in the media, including social media. Controversial, without a doubt, big companies buying up chunks of land and all the rest of it, but also an area with great potential to benefit communities across Scotland if we can get this right. So hugely important session at 11:30. Meantime, thank you all very, very much indeed. A special thanks to the Minister, and a special thanks to everyone who's been patient with my inability to get all the questions answered. I did my very best to group them as best I could. Thank you all, and look forward to seeing you in due course. Thank you.